anyone doesn't know me, I'm Howard Grossop. I'm chair of the Adult Ed Committee, new chair. And I'm very, very pleased to present Chris Kuuk to you. I've known Chris since he came to WestCon in 2001. In the early years, we worked together in the Jane Goodall Center. He took over the center briefly after I retired. But more importantly, he's the HarperCollins author of The Compassionate Achiever, a co-host of the Compassionate Achiever podcast, a professor of political science at WestCon, a Fulbright scholar, a director of the Capillaри Honors Program at WestCon, founder of the university's debate team, a member of Phi Beta Kappa. He received his PhD in political science from Boston College and his BA in political science from Boston University. He is also an international security fellow at Harvard and an MVP of the Mets.
Fellow, go Mets. Go Mets.
He's such an underachiever.
And after I spend that half day with him, I feel like taking a nap. So without any further introduction than that, here's Chris Kuuk.
Thanks, Howard. So we're going to talk about compassion and success and how they're together, how they actually are connected, right? That's the title of the talk, Compassion and Success, the link, and it is off. A lot of the information can be found in my book, but the way I got into it was really interesting because in the military, I was as a counterintelligence agent, I had to go through boot camp, and I had drill sergeants yell at me, "Cook, you're too nice." You know, you have to be more ruthless, right? I had coaches. I played baseball and football. "Cook, stop helping up the other team," right? I was told I couldn't do that. I worked on Wall Street. I worked at the American Stock Exchange. And each place, coaches, drill sergeants, bosses, they all said, "You're too nice. In order to succeed, you have to be more self-interested. You have to be more ruthless." And when I was going through it all, my coaches were saying that, my bosses were saying it, my drill sergeants were saying it, but then I realized the most successful people were the ones that did the opposite. And it wasn't just the people that I noticed that were the most successful. When I mean most successful, they sustained their success for quite a long time. Right? We all know ruthless, really putzes, right, that have risen to the top. That's part of life, but what happens to them most of the time? They get taken down by people that they've actually stepped on. So to me, success, that's not real success. It's temporary. Success should be, in my opinion, we can have a debate about this, sustained. Oh, and by the way, when I give talks, if there's something you disagree with, which I hope there will be, please just raise your hand and we can have the discussion. I can get right back on track. I'd rather you not. I kind of see public talks as a classroom. And in my classroom, I like a discussion. I don't like to be talked. I don't like to talk at people. I like to talk with y'all. Right? So if there's something that you find, problematic, or you disagree, or you agree, feel free to raise your hand and we can get right at it. Okay? But what I found out is that the best teams, and this happened in counterintelligence as well, were made up of people who were compassionate. Right? And so it's not just people, though. As I was saying, you can see it in history, you can see it in business. I would even argue, Howard, you can even see it in the environment. And just to give you 3 quick examples. In history, for those of you who don't know my background, I'm Estonian. My father was born in the country of Estonia. That's where that weird last name comes in. And actually, it's pronounced Kuuk in Estonian, cook in English, and it means rooster. But the Estonians have a severe problem with people like Putin and this guy named Stalin, right? Who took in one night 10,000 Estonians and killed them, starting with the professors. And just massacre them on the streets of Tallinn and Tartu. But one of the things that in 1944 Churchill asked Stalin, aren't you worried about the Pope, especially in Poland? And Stalin, with his evil laugh, like, ho, 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 ho. How many divisions, military divisions, does the Pope have? Right? Because Stalin believed that force will give him the success in history. Let's just go quickly through the end of history here for a certain entity. What happened to Stalin's Soviet Union? It's in the dustbin of history. Where's the Pope? Okay, so he's dealing with some issues in Pennsylvania and some child abuse stuff, but he's still around. And the church is still around, and the Soviet Union is gone, even though Putin's trying to bring it back. So who was, I would argue, is the more compassionate? Right? That's just one example. In business, right? Because I've had a number of people, you can't be compassionate in business, Dr. Kuuk, right? It's the opposite, and it's not. Think of, when I first got to WestCon, one of the first courses I teach, I'm trained as a political economist, especially when it comes to freshwater issues. That's what I did my doctoral dissertation on. And so I was very interested in the privatization of water, and very interested in how businesses operate. In the early 2000s, when I was teaching here, every single business article, every book, a guy named Thomas Friedman, which I hope you all know, right? Lexus and the Olive Tree uses this company as an example of how companies should operate. This company that every single author used is called Enron. Yeah, I'm glad you're laughing. Right? Yeah, Enron was considered the model of how you operate a business. We now know that Enron literally drove electricity into the ground to raise its own bottom line, so to make electricity scarce. Right? It was founded in 1985, and in 2001, it was gone. Right? It was looking out for its own self-interest. And just as, for sake of clarity, one of the jobs I also had in grad school, I was an energy consultant for a group called Cambridge Energy Research Associates up in Cambridge, Massachusetts. And one of our clients, and there's not enough showers I can take, was Enron. And so I did know about, I work on water issues, so I was their hydroelectric guy at Cambridge Energy. And so Enron was interested in hydrology in both Canada and in India, and that's where I worked for them. I did not work for them for the United States. I would have had a serious problem. But they were out for themselves. It was plain and simple. They didn't care about anybody else. Then you have a company like Patagonia, founded in the early 1970s, a decade before Enron, and Patagonia is going very strong. And nobody used, in the 80s and 90s and early 2000s, nobody used Patagonia as an example of how a business operates. It constantly gives back to the communities that it operates in. Clients, and I'm one, I wear my Patagonia hat when I go running, when I do my marathons. I was hoping my wife can see my white Patagonia hat with the black rim, right, so she can find me in the crowd. This idea, I will buy things Patagonia because they give back to the communities they're in. I am a loyal follower of theirs. Don't tell me that being ruthless and self-interested in business is the way to go. It's fine if you want to live a short-term success. I'm good with that. But you want sustainable success? People will know. And in this day and age of information, it's kind of hard to hide your business practices, no matter what Trump thinks. In nature, as another example, you have one of the hardest kind of basic elements, right? Rock. What can cut through rock that's pretty soft? Water. Water can cut through rock. So things like compassion, which are considered soft, can cut through the hardest of problems, the hardest of elements. We've mixed up compassion? I think we have a misunderstanding, a misinterpretation of what compassion is. And as being a founder of the debate team, I'm going to give you my definition when we get into this talk. We call it topicality. And you can either win or lose a debate on your definition. So we'll have a brief discussion about the definition of compassion so we're all on the same sheet of music. So what I'm going to do for the talk is basically talk about the definition, talk about this guy named Darwin. He had a lot to say, a ton to say about compassion. We're going to get to that. And then we're going to talk about how compassion strengthens you as an individual, but also, because Howard was the one who invited me here, I wanted to pick a topic on success, and I'd like to talk about learning. He's one of the best professors I think we have at WestCon, so we also have him teaching in the honors program. And I think that, and there's a couple of you here that I know that education is a key aspect of your life. So I wanted to hit learning, and we can go on to other areas as well. And then go quickly over my 4-step process of how to build compassion from really a non-religious aspect, just in terms of how you build compassion in an everyday experience. All right, so that's kind of the structure of it. So the definition of compassion, it has 2 parts. The first part is a 360-degree holistic understanding of the problem or suffering of another. Part 1. You try for a 360-degree holistic understanding of the problem or suffering of another. Part 2. And you have a commitment to take action to address that problem, resolve that issue. Problems with my definition. Any questions regarding the definition? That's the definition we use for compassion. Just so you know, it's also the definition that science uses as well. Lisi.
Well, I would think that just because you identify that somebody may have a situation that needs helping, they may not want it.
Yes. And I call it the action of non-doing. One of the things you can do that might be the most compassionate is to do nothing. For example, my son, who had vocal cord dysfunction, he was hospitalized so much so that he lost his oxygen. He was down to 86% of his oxygen, and his voice sounded like Darth Vader. He couldn't go to school. He got actually bullied and picked on. And so, when he was going back to school, as a former counterintelligence agent and as a proud papa, I wanted to go set the stage and say, yeah, you don't mess with my little dude, right? And so I talked to him about it before he went back to school. He goes, Dad?
Stay out of it.
And what he did was pretty amazing. I mean, he did 2 amazing things that I think helped him become the man he was, and it's because I stayed out of it, right? 1, he invited the person who bullied him, the very first day of school, to his lunch table with his friends. The second thing that he did is he got up and stood up in front of the class and made a joke about how he was the son of Darth Vader. He handled the problem and resolved his issue. But yes, one of the things you can do is still the act of non-doing. It's not doing nothing. Right? Because we still had to talk.
You're acknowledging.
Exactly. So yes, I get that. But I cover that in the book, right? Because that is an important step. And that was hard for me to do. And I know I married above me. My wife, Ellie, is on the couch over there as well. And it was hard for us as parents not to step in. Especially he was so young. What was he, 5th grade? 5th grade, right? And so I wanted to do something. Okay? That was a good point, though. Yes?
One word that in the definition that I have a question about is understanding.
Yes?
The reason I ask that is because in an early job I had, admissions office in a graduate school that had a counseling program.
Oh, okay.
Some of the faculty were saying that in order to become a marriage counselor, you have to have lived through it. We all know people who have been through suffering, and you can't say to these people, I know how you feel, because the first response you get is, no, you'll never know how I feel because it hasn't happened to you.
Mm-hmm.
So are there then people who will deny your compassion or your ability to be compassionate?
See, I think we're going to get to this. First off, the short answer is, I think it's possible, yes. But I also think that we conflate two very different words, empathy and compassion, and they're not the same. So you can have an understanding of someone's problem and suffering without feeling the same pain that they have. And I think that's a really important difference, and we're going to get into that, I promise. We're going to square that away. It really bothers me to hear, and some of you know I've worked with President Obama and his sister, and I still work with his sister to this day. I've been 8 years now working with them. And she, Maya, is still trying to get her brother to stop using empathy and put compassion in. Because he's big about empathy. And it's like, for me, a chalkboard with your fingernails. Because they're two very, very different experiences. And science has proven it. Specifically, we're going to talk about her, Dr. Tanya Singer from Leipzig, Germany, Max Planck Institute. She's the first one to find this. And then there was a bunch of male professors in Stanford that said they were. She was the very first. They replicated her study. And so we're going to get into that. So hold me accountable when we get to empathy. Okay. Actually, I remember my first experience in passing through a course was going through your committee, and your questions were the most awesome. Yes, made me rethink. Any other questions about definition of compassion? All right, here we go. So, Charles Darwin. When I say survival of the fittest, and we all think that Charles Darwin came up with that phrase. He did not. Matter of fact, he actually argued against the simplicity of that idea in a book called The Descent of Man after much of his research. He actually, in chapters 2, 4, and 5 of The Descent of Man, by the way, you can all get that for free on the net, and you can go double check what I'm saying right now, right, online. He actually makes fun of people who believe in survival of the fittest, especially in chapter 2 of that book. In 4 and 5, he goes into why that's a misnomer, because most people believe that fittest means being self-interested, ruthless, right?
I think the definition of fittest
Mm-hmm.
applies not only to what the individual is about, but more often than not, what the environment is about.
Yes, I think you're right. But for most people, when you say survival of the fittest, they have one idea in mind, right? Darwin was much more complex, and your understanding is much more complex. But for most people, it is not that idea, right? It's that looking out for number one and stepping on others, right? So for Darwin, he hypothesized something like that on the origin of species. But it was one of many hypotheses, right? And a hypothesis is a guess, educated guess, right? And so he goes, from those hypotheses, I'm going to test them like a good scientist. And on the descent of man, he answers some of them after much of his research. And he's arguing what Herbert Spencer coined. So it was a philosopher who coined the phrase survival of the fittest. We get taught the bumper sticker version of Charles Darwin. I had gotten that in school, and I want my school lessons back. Because my teachers and my professors screw up. And by the way, we still screw up when it comes to science. Just as an example, gravity. It's still being taught as a force. In every school, I've written a pre-K through 12 social and emotional learning program, so I get to go, to the chagrin of my wife every year, to Hawaii for at least a week to train school teachers. And I sit down with science teachers, English teachers, you name it, and still science is being taught. Gravity. being taught by science teachers as a force. We know Einstein was right. It was proven several years ago that gravity is a curvature of space-time. It's like being in a hammock, right? Anyways, it still bothers me that we still teach the wrong thing, and we're still teaching Darwin incorrectly, according to Darwin's own words in The Descent of Man. And what's even crazier, so Darwin, when I was first putting together the book ideas and going out and talking to people, I would always get Darwin thrown at me. And I realized I was listening to my teachers, and I was reading secondhand accounts of Darwin, not the original Darwin. So I was like, man, I blew that. I got to go read all of Darwin. To the chagrin of my wife, I actually got all the books from Amazon. And then I realized, holy cow, I got to Descent of Man. Darwin actually sides with the compassionate achiever. Because this is what he says in chapters 2, 4, and 5. He says that the species that would move up the evolutionary ladder the most efficiently and effectively is the species that will have the highest number of its members as, and this is his word, sympathetic to each other. The highest number of its members that are sympathetic to each other. Does that sound like the Darwin you were taught? Because it wasn't Darwin I was taught. And then Paul Ekman and other scholars decided to find out what Darwin meant by sympathetic. And they found out that he meant 3 different things in different books. It meant altruism, generosity, and guess what the third word was? Compassion. Exactly. Right? Altruism, generosity, and compassion.
I want to say compatibility.
What?
Compatibility.
Well, according to Ekman and others, that didn't come up, but I'll go with you on that. All right. And what's really wild, in order to prove his point, he uses a real-life example that he witnessed. And in The Descent of Man, he has a drawing of a little American monkey in the zoo that he would always visit. And in that enclosure with the little American monkey that was in his zoo area that he would visit, was a larger primate. And that little American monkey was afraid of that larger primate. And Darwin talks about this in The Descent of Man. It's quite clear to back up his idea of what sympathetic meant. And when the caregiver would come out and feed the primates, that little American monkey would always eat last because he was deathly afraid of that larger one. Always stayed away. One time, and Darwin witnessed this, the caregiver turned his back, the larger primate came at him. So the caregiver, the human caregiver, did not know. That little American monkey, Darwin witnessed, ran out and intercepted that larger primate and saved the human caregiver. Darwin, in The Descent of Man, uses that as an example of what he meant by sympathetic. Why wasn't I taught that? Why weren't my bosses, my drill sergeants, taught that? My coaches, bosses, you name it. No, they would always tell me, it's survival of the fittest, Kuuk. Look out for yourself. Darwin was quite clear, people. It wasn't about that. It was something bigger. Right? It's looking out for others. So that, when it comes to Darwin, at least I, have been taught incorrectly. And compassion is about success, even in evolution, according to the man, when it comes to evolution. And if you don't believe me, please, I beg you, read it. See it for yourself. Okay? Hopefully you'll stir something. And just as another great thinker who talked about compassion, which I never even learned of, and I'm a political economist who also focuses on the strength or weaknesses of civil society. And so this gentleman, Jean-Jacques Rousseau, famous for the social contract, right? I had to read all of his work. I come to find out, did not read all of his work until after grad school. It was a good chunk of his work was only in French until about 2004. And then I bought those books. And lo and behold, Jean-Jacques Rousseau says, we are all born with natural compassion. His phrase, quote unquote, natural compassion, and we unlearn it, according to Jean-Jacques Rousseau, through society and what we're taught. Can you see how I'm getting here? I was taught about Darwin, right? I was taught by my coaches, right? But even on American playgrounds. I was a Fulbright scholar at the University of Tartu. My wife had just given birth to our youngest child 5 weeks before, and we're still married. We went with a 5-week-old, a 2-year-old, and a 4-year-old. And I said, hey, we're going on a Fulbright scholarship to Estonia. Yeah. And I was teaching an international relations class there to about 119 European scholars. So the University of Tartu is called the Oxbridge of the Baltics. They call it the Oxford and Cambridge because all these students from all these countries come there, and it's such a great experience. And I was teaching about realism in international relations. And in the United States, I use the example of realism, basically simplifying here, that one person's gain or another country's gain is another country's loss, right? Zero sum. And I use, for students in America, I use King of the Hill, right? And American students, yeah, I got that, I know what that means. This young Polish scholar, I will never forget her. She raised her hand. She goes, Dr. Kuuk, what's King of the Hill? So I explained what King of the Hill was, right? That in American playgrounds, kids get up on top of monkey bars, top of a hill, and they push other kids down to be the king or queen of the hill, right? Or the monkey bars. Oh, and I said, oh, there's another game we play in the United States. And I did not learn about that one until I moved to what I call Children of the Corn, Brookfield, Connecticut. Because I'm from the Bronx. Not one person was like me in my school in the Bronx, right? When I come out here, I wonder what they did to all the other kids. It scared me as a little child to come to a place where everyone looked like me. It freaked me out. That's why I call it Children of the Corn, right? Well, I played stickball and stoop ball. My first day in the Bronx, as 4-year-old, I would walk to school, walk back for lunch, walk back to school on my own, right? And come back. Didn't get stabbed, didn't get a broken bone, didn't get anything in the Bronx, in New York. Children of the Corn, they play this game called Kill the Carrier. I did not know. All I saw was a ball that looked like Joe Namath threw, right? Remember, I'm a New York kid. Everything is relative to New York, right? So I told myself, first day, first recess, just catch the freaking ball. So I caught it. No one told me that I needed to run from those little terrorists. First day at Huckleberry Hill Elementary School, I broke my wrist. I was deathly afraid to go back to school. So I explained that. And a young Polish scholar raised her hand. She goes, thank you, Dr. Kuuk. And for about 2 seconds, I was like, yeah, I nailed that. And then she said this. That explains so much about the United States. Because they don't play King of the Hill. They don't play Kill the Carrier. Rousseau was right. We unlearn our natural compassion by the society and the communities that we're in. My grandmother was right. My grandmother was right. Who you hang with matters. She was more right than I ever wanted to give her credit for. Yeah.
But it's the same with prejudice.
Yes.
So it's the same example. We learn.
Exactly.
We're born with prejudice.
We're not. We're not. Right? And that's the beauty. Everything is a social construct. And what you talk about, what you emphasize, is the key. So one of the things, and Howard, I don't know if you know this, but in the honors program when I took over, basically, and I know this is not fair because there's more than two different ways of seeing a type A personality, but honors students are type A's. I say that you can either be a shark, you eat others to get ahead, or you're a dolphin. You swim with others, and your success leads to other people's success. We will kick you out of the honors program if you're a shark, because the freaking sharks did the 2008 economic crisis. Really smart people who are in it for themselves. I don't want my name to be associated. I don't want WestCon's name to be associated. I certainly don't want Mr. Kathwari's name to be associated with people like that. When I think of honor, it's not just up here. It's here. And we've forgotten that. We should be teaching the whole person, not just what appears on scores. And if you have an argument that beats Darwin on compassion about why you're that way, because I did have one young man who had perfect SATs. He was admitted temporarily to WestCon because I read his essay. He literally did this. Perfect SATs, so he didn't have to do this. He wrote about globalization. And he took the third paragraph, I remember it quite clearly, he took different paragraphs from Thomas Friedman, from different writings of Thomas Friedman, and put them together for a one-page, beautiful essay on globalization. So what I did is I showed where each paragraph came from. But you know what was sad? I called him in. His parents came in. And I pointed out that the whole essay was plagiarized. His parents were mad at me. That told me everything that I needed to know. They picked up and walked out. He went to some other school. But he's the type of person that would ruin any program that you want to try and build, because it's about community. And if you build the right community, my God, it will flourish. And if you have people looking out for each other as they're climbing the ladder, that's where I want to be, right? And Rousseau talked about that. Yes, sir.
Okay, going back to the monkey and the gorilla. The monkey saved you from the gorilla because the monkey knew in the environment that he was living in, you fed him. And he understood that if the gorilla killed him, that he wouldn't have the person that fed him anymore.
Sometimes he didn't get to eat.
Yeah. So,
No, the monkey.
yeah.
So even though, I think it was more than that.
Okay.
I think it's part of it.
That's part of it.
Yeah.
Another thing is, when you moved to the sticks out of the city, you didn't know your environment either. And you thought incorrectly that the environment here was like the environment you were.
Oh, no, I did not think that.
Oh.
Oh, no, no, no.
Caught the ball.
Yeah, all I did, because I wanted to impress them.
Yeah, you caught the ball.
But that's anywhere.
Knowing
That's
that
anywhere.
they were going to get to you and practically kill you because you had the ball in your arms.
Mm-hmm.
But that was the environmental thing that you didn't know about. And so what I'm getting to is for humans, survival, we all have to know our individual environmental features in order to be the best survivors in that environment. And for me, environment is key.
Yeah, it is. But compassion matters.
Yes.
That's, right? It's part of making that environment more conducive to more people surviving.
I agree with that.
All right. So you're not saying anything that's opposite.
Right.
Right? It's saying just another part of the equation.
I'm adding something.
Okay. Okay. We're definitely not going to get through everything. I'm looking at the time. Yes. But we will get to empathy and compassion.
And some people they have this inherent winner attitude, best of the best. Of course, nobody's the best of the best because they're always going to be better than you.
Yes.
But, it's like there's an inherent conflict, I think, in most of society, at least here in this country for sure. Because we're all, even though, the winner attitude is different to different people, their level they have at. But I think the idea of best of the best is something that's inbred in, I don't know if it's Americans or
Right.
sports, because we're a sports-heavy country, but I mean, I know everybody, most kids, they want to be the best of the best.
So that doesn't explain the person sitting next to you and me as Met fans, right? Because when did we last win everything? It was when I was in boot camp.
What I'm saying is,
No, I know.
they cut their losses on compassion because they want to be the best of the best.
And what's really,
It's like I can be
yes.
compassionate to a degree, and then it's like, no, that's enough.
And their success is very limited, right? And when I'm with students, especially high schoolers, right, we go over NBA championships. Because quite a few years ago now, right, the Miami Heat had all the superstars on one team and didn't win a championship. Meanwhile, the San Antonio Spurs had one dude, the Admiral, and a bunch of players that all looked out for one another, and they kept winning. Right? And it's over and over again how you make that team and who plays looking out for everybody else. And even Pele said that, right? Because it's the greatest soccer player that ever lived, right? But he said it was your teammates that made a successful team, not one person, right? So you're right. We think we know what it takes to be a winner. But what I'm trying to upend is that traditional, conventional way of seeing it. And I love to have these debates because all I want people to start doing is thinking differently about it. I'm telling you what I saw anecdotally in my field, and then what Darwin and Rousseau and others talk about. And now I ask people to give me their science. And it's awesome because all I hear is crickets. Because they have no freaking science to back it up. You can give me all anecdotes you want. I'm giving you anecdotes and science.
Do the difference between compassion and empathy.
All right, we got one more other hand. I promise we're going to get to that.
It's like the idea of the Moneyball, where you don't have any great players. They're all average players, but they all work together and they have a winning team.
I love you. Yeah. Yes, exactly. Thank you. Yeah, exactly. Right, and that's what I'm trying to get at. Right? Let's look at the real world, not what you think the real world is. What is actually happening out there? And there's great studies on this all over the place. And I can give, I have a presentation, but I can give it to Howard so you can see some of the citations as well. And I list the citations. HarperCollins said, Dr. Kuuk, we'll publish your book. And I wanted them, because they're the #1 publisher in the world. And I said, but you have to write it for 8th grade and above. I said, okay, as long as you allow me to put all my footnotes in. They're like, we don't do that. I said, well, then I'm not writing. They put all the footnotes at the end of the book. So you can get to my science. You don't have to go to a separate website like you do on other HarperCollins books. You can still get to all the science through the footnotes. So you can see where I got it. So if we want to have a debate about my information, I want that. Because I'm tired of people saying things and not citing where they got it from. Like politicians. Like many news outlets, right? Show me where you got it. I'm showing you my cards. Let's play. That's fun to me. That's also competition. And I think competition can be compassionate. They're not opposites. I love that. Okay. Yes. And let's get to, and Lisa, you're going to pull me, right?
No, people are, we good till what, 11:15 or something like that?
Okay.
Is that good for everybody?
All right, so let's get to the difference between compassion and empathy. We could also throw sympathy in there. Empathy basically is feeling the same emotion as someone else. So if someone else is depressed, you feel depressed, you feel sad, right? And that releases neurotransmitters like cortisol, right? Stress. Compassion, you already know my definition, but it's also feeling warmth and kindness towards someone else where you take action. And Dr. Tanya Singer, what she found out, and this was published first in the September 2013 Science magazine. And Howard, Science magazine, is that considered a... Okay, thank you. Right? So it was a great story about her work in that September 2013 issue. And that's what got me excited too, because she used fMRI machines and took people from all over the globe, male, female, and put them in the machines and asked them to think empathetically, like that, and to think compassionately at a separate instance. And what she found out, and what now others have replicated, let me just back up. If you're a psychopath, this doesn't work. And if you are a psychopath, please see me afterwards. All right? What she found is that to every person, if they're thinking empathetically, she found that we use the neural networks of when we're in pain. So your brain thinks you're in pain when you think empathetically for someone. And then she had them think compassionately, using the definition that I gave you. And what she found is that different neural networks lit up. It was the same neural networks of when we're in love, like real love, like 32 years of marriage love, right? That strengthens you. When you're in love, man, you feel like you're on top of the world. You can do anything. And what we found out through the work of a gentleman named Paul Zak, he wrote a very famous book called The Moral Molecule, and the work of Sean Aker from Harvard, was that when we think compassionately, we activate a peptide hormone called oxytocin, not Oxycontin. It's a peptide hormone called oxytocin, and women who are pregnant and who have given birth have a lot of it. They're very, very compassionate, right? You can also, if you eat dark chocolate, not milk chocolate, not milk, dark, you can also activate oxytocin. And now they found a specific spot at the earlobe that everyone can actually stimulate their vagus nerve, which also stimulates oxytocin. And the vagus nerve, I get into it into the book even more. But this idea, oxytocin then activates two neurotransmitters at the same time. Dopamine and serotonin. And let me just go back. Empathy does none of this. It actually does the opposite. It produces cortisol, stress hormone. That's what empathy does. It clouds how we see things. Dopamine is that high feeling you get. I use my wife already. The other thing, what am I addicted to, sweetie? Chocolate milk, right? When I have a glass of chocolate milk, I get excited. And students know that if they come see me during office hours, I have chocolate milk in my refrigerator and we share a glass of chocolate milk together, right? And for me, my dopamine kicks on, right? But also serotonin, which is a calming level at the same time. Because if it was just dopamine, it's my chocolate milk addiction, right? But serotonin, that combination, Zak and Aker found out it creates a feeling of happiness, optimism, hope. Remember, empathy produces cortisol. Which one leads to more success, do you think? Yeah. It's the one where you have optimism, hope, happiness. Compared to cortisol when you're stressed out. Because I don't know about you, when I'm stressed out, I make mistakes. And I know I'm not the only one. So the science...
You make them when you're compassionate.
Spoken like a true wife. Thanks, sweetie. She is keeping me honest. One of the ways to visualize this is think about when someone falls into a hole. The empathetic response is to jump into the hole with them. The compassionate response is to give them a ladder or a rope and you help them up. You don't have to get down in there. You don't have to feel that same idea to know what can potentially help somebody, right? That is a big difference. And it matters in teaching. Because one of the first schools that we went to in Hawaii. So the reason Hawaii chose our social emotional learning program is because it started with right after Sandy Hook. I've been working on issues. I started my own social emotional learning program on compassion. And the day after, one of the moms, we actually just had her over for dinner last night, one of the moms from this, who lost her son in Sandy Hook, her name is Scarlett Lewis. Jesse Lewis, who died a hero, right, saved 9 of his fellow classmates' lives. She called me because her medical doctor, who was sent by the government, I did not know this, when a tragedy happens like this, psychologists, medical doctors they all come to that place of tragedy to help that community get through it. And so the doctor that was signed to her, Dr. Laura Asher, had just read the piece I'd written for the Dalai Lama on education. And Scarlett asked Dr. Laura, I want to do something in schools. Do you know of a person? And Laura goes, yeah, I know the dude, so I have my dude status still. The dude is 15 minutes away. She called me right up. And I was getting through the Center for Compassion, Creativity, and Innovation. I actually had a meeting. I don't know if you remember, Howard, people were against the Center for Compassion at the university. And so I had to defend why we should have a Center for Compassion, Creativity, and Innovation. So I said, yes, let's talk tomorrow, come to my office. And I stopped what I was doing, and I said, yes, I'll do this with you. It's called social emotional learning, on one condition. We make it free. We win grants, and we pay teachers, so they take our structure, and they implement it in each grade level. So it's not a university professor writing the curriculum. It's actually people in the real world doing it in the classrooms. They're taking our ideas, but then making it real for their students. And Hawaii didn't know, they had some severe problems, and so they took our program, and within a year, that one school that took it, their scores, they didn't change anything else. Same textbooks, same everything. It went up 20% just on the social emotional learning side. And so we get to go back every single year, and last time I went, it was over 375 teachers from the state of Hawaii, and that's what happens every single time. And we have these great 2-day conferences about how we do this. And the reason I'm bringing this up is that when you have dopamine flowing through a classroom, a gentleman named John Medina wrote a book called Brain Rules, and it's about the neuroscience of learning. Every honors freshman at WestConn has to read this book in order to go through the honors program. Because no matter what your major is, if you know how this thing works and how it relates to your environment, right, then you can structure your own study habits in a way that helps you succeed even more. So when I initially took over the program, it was a 3.2 as an average. That's not a very good average for an honors program. We're now, it was 60 students when I took over. We're now over 400 students in the program at a 3.66. That's an A- average for over 400 students. No one returns this book. I have about 125 freshmen every year. They keep this book, and it's something we constantly go back to. The reason I bring it up is that John Medina writes about dopamine and the importance of dopamine in learning. He calls it, quote unquote, he's a neurobiologist at Washington, University of Washington. Post-it note of learning. Dopamine, when there's dopamine flowing in someone's head, they're likely to remember whatever they're studying more. And so, what does compassion do? It activates the neurotransmitter dopamine. And the reason I bring that up, when I was in New York City, I got to tell you, Howard, probably you wouldn't have hired me at WestConn if you guys knew this, but I was basically a C student in the Bronx. I went to a Catholic school. The nuns, if you got anything wrong, took out your hand, made sure the knuckles were exposed, and then hit your hand until either 2 things happened. Started bleeding, or you could see the white of your knuckles. And I remember one thing really, really well. For some reason, when I was a little kid, I could not get latitude and longitude right. It was a 50-50 guess. And I would get pummeled for my 50-50 guess. The Do you think cortisol was going through my head at that school? Cortisol was. I was stressed. No dopamine. I was deathly afraid to go to school. We move out to Children of the Corn. Okay, so I broke my wrist, right? So I was afraid of the kids. But I'll never forget Mrs. Virginia Peck, my teacher. When I walked into her classroom, and this is a public school classroom, there's maps and globes all over. I literally thought I exchanged one hell for another. But she could tell right away that I was guessing on latitude and longitude. She got down on one knee. I remember it so clearly. It changed my life. She asked me how I saw the lines. And I said, I saw them up and down and going across. And she said, good. And I was like, oh, that's my problem. And then she did this. And it's right, these are tricks of learning that I didn't know about, but she told me. She goes, your A and across is the A in latitude. Your O and down is the O in longitude. And sweetie, do we have maps and globes in almost every room in our house?
We do.
We now do. Because I realized I could learn. But her compassion, she took time to understand how I saw the problem. She didn't put her understanding on the problem. This is get back to your question about understanding. You have to take time to listen to how someone else sees the problem. Because they might see the problem differently than you. But you can understand it if you listen to them. But we listen in this society to reply. We don't listen to learn. And so one of the things that students always see me do, I always have usually water, or I do this when they think I'm praying. It's not. I'm going to tell you, when I do this, it's to keep my mouth shut. Because there are times I want to jump in, right? And I'm going to tell you my number one teacher on this. When we were first married, I thought as a husband, she told me a problem. I got to solve it. Yeah, you guys are all laughing. You guys went through the same lessons I went through, right? She didn't want me to solve it. She wanted me to listen, right? And then she can solve it herself, right? But as a young man who had hormonal problems, because I think she's absolutely beautiful, right? I wanted to impress her and to do something. What an idiot.
I literally had to tell him, no, this is where you just go,
Right?
that's terrible.
But the idea was to listen to see her perspective. And Mrs. Peck did that for me. I felt so safe in that classroom that the short story is I became a straight A student, graduated at the top of my class. I didn't have to pay a dime, not a cent, for my PhD. That's because one teacher's compassion unlocked my potential. Teachers are such a powerful effect. And that's why when I had a chance to either go from Harvard to UPenn or Harvard to WestCon, and I had to make my decision, do I want to be a teacher or do I want to be something else? Because I was at Harvard. You don't teach. You actually don't get involved with students at many of those types of schools. I fell in love with teaching, and I wanted to go to a teaching university. And that's what this is here. And I absolutely love the students here. They're first generation like me. A lot of them, one of them you know very well, lacked the self-confidence I had. And all of a sudden, you just open a slight door and watch them go. And man, they take off. And now they're making a difference here in this community. To me, I feel like you can't, it doesn't get any better than that, right? But Mrs. Peck is the one who did that to me. And every time I try to get in front of a crowd, I try to summon my inner Mrs. Peck to listen to how they see the problem. They understand it. So the understanding comes from listening to learn, right? My Luca, I know we're running short, right? Right? It's about listening to learn on how to get there. And I think we need to learn those skills a little bit more. So one of the things I talk about, one way we can improve that is I listen to podcasts I am diametrically opposed to in terms of concepts and in arguments. And one of my goals is to listen to the entire podcast without shutting it off or without yelling back at it. I'm not kidding. So I learned to listen all the way through, right? And there's a bunch of those things that we can do, and I talk about, those activities that we can do in the book. The other thing is how you ask questions matters, right? Are you deposing someone, right? Or are you exploring what they want to, right? And how you ask a question will make someone feel like they can open up to you or not, right? And how you use open versus closed questions, right? So there's a bunch of different ways you can learn to listen better. And I feel like our society is like the prairie home companion, right? Lake Wobegon, right? You guys know, I can't use this anymore with students. They don't know Lake Wobegon, right? Right. That we all think we're better listeners than we are. And we all can improve our listening skills. And that is the first step of compassion, is learning to listen, to understand, so that you can understand, to know what you need to do in order to help that person from their perspective, right? Because if you're coming at it just from your perspective, you can make the problem bigger. And I think if we don't learn from each other and how we see perspectives, and I usually show this image that when you look at it, I ask the crowd to say, tell me how many rows you see. And the image is set up so if you start from left to right, you see a different number than people who look at it from right to left. So I get people yelling, 4, 3, and they're all looking at each other like, what the? Right? I get some say 7, and then the unique people say 12, right? And I still don't see 12. But right? And this idea is I want people to understand that their neighbors, the person they came to the talk with, see the same exact image differently. And we are different. That's what makes us and our society and our communities so awesome. To me, diversity, stories of immigrants make us stronger because of those different perspectives, right? So when we get to learning and understanding, I think that we realize that we can solve problems more effectively. I'm not about efficiency. I'm about effectiveness. I think you can really be an efficient idiot, right? And we know a lot of people like that. And I have a problem with focusing on efficiency. We should be focusing on effectiveness. And even Abraham Lincoln said that, right? If you give me 6 hours to chop down a tree, a famous quote of his, I'll spend the first 4 hours sharpening the axe, and the rest of the time chopping it down. Right? It should be about effectiveness. When you connect, so understanding to know, listen to learn, right? This is the Luca, listening to learn, understand to know, and then connect to capabilities. Sometimes we don't have all the answers. This is a real example that happened here at WestCon. We get a lot of veterans at WestCon who have served in Iraq and Afghanistan. And I had one young man who won the Purple Heart and saved his unit when all hell broke loose in Afghanistan. And his young daughter was born with a heart malfunction. And she was back in the hospital, and his wife, and I think some of you will remember this, his wife was the woman in the car that was off of 684, who no one knew was there for 2 days. Remember that. That was his wife. So his daughter was in the hospital. His wife, no one could find. She could hear the traffic, but no one could see her car off of 684, and she couldn't move. He came into my office, and for those of us who have either carried a .45 or a 9mm, you know when someone sits down, what happens to someone's jacket when they sit down when they're carrying a weapon. He was carrying a weapon. He was legally allowed to carry. But I knew he was coming in to see me as a last-ditch effort. He came in to say he was dropping out of school. He had to take care of his wife. He had to take care of his family. But I knew it was a last-ditch effort. So I sent my 2 assistants on a wild goose chase for something that didn't exist. So just in case I screwed up and couldn't get him to the counseling center, they were nowhere near to be seen. Basically, I had to connect to him as a veteran, not as a professor. And so I knew what he did in Afghanistan, and I could tell he was throwing in the towel here. So basically, I asked him, I said, you know, I know you've been through hell. I said, but look what you did for your brothers in battle. And he goes, Dr. Kuuk, I knew what weapons to use there. I have no weapons here. And I said, yeah, but didn't your men trust you? And he said, yeah. I said, that is the key weapon. I said, do you trust me? He goes, yes. And I said, I need you to walk with me so I can connect you to people that can help you see that you can win this battle. We walked, the short story is we walked to the counseling center together. I told the counseling center what was happening. The short story, he graduated the next year. They live in New Milford. He has his own business that's succeeding. But if I tried to counsel him completely, I did not have the capability to do that. I am not trained to do that. I know I can get him to where he needs to be trained. So sometimes when the most compassionate thing is not just not doing something, but it's to connect them with the people that can actually help them. So it's not only to understand their problem, but to understand who can actually help them. And it's not you sometimes. And that's cool. But understand that you have limitations. Right? And that's something I think we fail to realize. And one of the things that popped up for me, before I did my counterintelligence, my favorite job, straight up, is being a university professor. My second job, counterintelligence agent. My third job was lifeguarding. You're in the top 5, Neil. I worked for Neil as an intern in the law office. Don't worry, you're in there. He was like, I can see him counting down. Where the heck am I on this? You're there, dude. But lifeguarding taught me that. When I was training to be a lifeguard, I thought, all right, when I'm going to save somebody, you go straight at him, you get him, and you take him in, and you save him, and you're the freaking hero. Right? You're shaking your head. Right? You know me. See, that is so backwards. Right? So when right. So, and this is what happened. I have the scar. A double drowning happened. And when someone's drowning, they turn really strong. She put her nails right through my hand. Those are fingernail scar. And so you're trained when you're to save somebody, if someone grabs onto you, take them down. It's the opposite. That's not the most efficient way, right, to get somebody, to take them underwater, because where does a drowning person don't want to go? Underwater. They release you right away. And while you're under, you move your body behind them underwater, come up and grab them, and then take them in, securely in. And I was like, oh my God, how many times will I use that idea? Not necessarily go direct on, go under, around, and come back up, right? It's not the most efficient way, but it's the most effective way to getting it done. I would actually argue it's both, but most people say go directly, right, when you talk about efficiency. So connect to capabilities happens in many different ways as well, right? And to think of those different ways is really key. And then finally, act to solve. Act to solve, one of the examples I like to cite is actually something that really happened. You know countdown clocks at lights? At stoplights? Well, when they first came up, it's a concept, right? So you have the knowledge of a countdown clock could actually help, maybe. Well, we had this really cool example that happened in the world, like I think a decade ago now. China and South Korea decided to put countdown clocks on their streets in certain cities. One country put it on red lights. The other country put it on green lights. Yeah, you're laughing because you know where this goes. China initially put it just on the green lights, saw accidents skyrocket. Because what do people think? I don't care what ethnicity you are. Exactly, I got 1 second, I can floor it, and I can make it through. And more accidents went up. In South Korea, they only put it on red lights. Accidents went down. People are like, I only got 3 seconds to wait until it changes. I can wait. Both used the concept of countdown clocks. But how they acted to solve the problem of reducing accidents using that technology made all the difference in the world. One went backwards, the other one went forwards in reducing it. So for me, compassion, remember, it's about that understanding, and it's about action. But it involves the environment, it involves context, it involves getting an understanding of another's perspective, not how you just understand it, right? And I think if we thought more along those lines, compassion, we would have much more successful communities, much more successful society. And I think we would lessen the impact that fear has on the unknown and on the other. I can't tell you how many conversations I had about people when I first was in the service that this really happened to us. Our first landlord, as a counterintelligence agent, I could bust military police, thank you. And so I did not want to live on post, because when you live on post in the military, you don't need a search warrant. And one of the things that they train you in school, in counterintel school, is to live off post. So we went searching, and the landlord saw, and I guess I look like whatever an American male is supposed to look like. And then I realized, he goes, we're going to take care of you and put you in so you're not around anybody else. I didn't know what he meant. I quickly found out what he meant. And so I found out, right, basically he was a racist. I have a problem with people who are racist. And so when he gave us that apartment, I also asked Ellie when I went away, let's buy milk for everyone else in the apartment complex. And so when other units went out, what was our apartment used for, basically?
General store.
General store for every single person in the apartment complex.
The military takes away the family food allowance. So when your soldier goes to the field, the family food allowance gets taken away. And there were teens with babies, and so they had no money for food.
And they were all different ethnicities. So he came back to me when I came back. He goes, what are you doing? He goes, I thought you were, I said, yeah. And to see a white guy turn whiter was awesome. Because I said, yeah, I'm the son of an immigrant. And he took a step back. And he said, but I look like I'm their worst, the KKK's worst nightmare. I look like whatever they think a white American male looks like, but I'm the son of an immigrant. And that's the point I want to show them. I don't care who you are, you can make a positive difference in the world. And if we take the time to listen, take the time to understand, take the time to connect, and act to solve in a way that actually solves the problem, doesn't create more problems, or even question the way you see the world, this would be a much better place to live in. So thank you, everyone. Questions?